Hey folks, this is Don from Elastic Strength and the Hypercarnivore Diet, and in this video I'm going to respond to a request for some basic information about training for shoulder mobility from a subscriber, John Tedeschi. So let's get into it. In my view, shoulder mobility has four basic aspects. Number one is scapular mobility, both in a push situation, as in a push-up, or in a pull situation, as in a pull-up. And then also shoulder flexion and shoulder extension, and finally circumduction. So let's get into what I do for these. So if we look at scapular mobility, I have basically two things that I incorporate in my warm-ups before my strength training sessions. One is scapular push-ups, which is protraction and retraction of the scapula under load in the plank position. You can make this easier by doing it on your knees and more difficult by doing it on your toes. And in my case, I do it on my fingertips. You don't have to do it on your fingertips to start, but I do. So it's protraction and retraction of the scapulae without bending your elbows. Second, I do scapular pull-ups. So scapular pull-ups involve hanging from a bar, and I usually have my feet supported when I do this. And without bending the arms, you pull your scapulae down, scapular depression, and retract them, pull them together, and do that for repetitions. So when you first start out, you're going to need to make it easier. So to make it easier, you put your feet on the ground, on the floor, and bend your knees. And to make it harder, you put your feet up on the bench, as I have. Or even harder, you just hang freely, which I do sometimes when I have a bar that is high enough off the ground for me to hang freely, like when I go outdoors. So that's the scapular mobility aspect. Then I have shoulder flexion. So that's a basic function, raising your arm overhead. That's called shoulder flexion. So for that, I do three different exercises, and I'm going to mention a fourth that is for people who aren't doing the third, which I do. Okay, so the first of those exercises is the butcher block. So you can see from the butcher block you need a kind of a elevated bench, a table or something like that, and you need a barbell. You hold the barbell in a supinated grip as if you were doing a barbell curl. You take the position that's shown, and then you let the barbell pull your arms into flexion while your elbows are on the bench, and your head should be clearing the edge of the bench. And this is stretching the triceps and the latissimus dorsi primarily. You also want to be sure that in this position you keep a posterior pelvic tilt. So you, rather than arching your back in normal lordosis, you flatten your back out by having a little posterior pelvic tilt, because that makes the stretch more intense. Then after the butcher block, I do the hanging cobra. So you can do this on the rings as you see me doing it in this video, or you can do it on a bar. You don't have to have the rings. If you use the bar, you use a pronated grip with your palms facing away from you, is probably going to be most comfortable. And you can make this harder by making the bar higher and easier by making the bar lower. This pulls your arm. This is like a passive shoulder flexion exercise. It pulls your arm into flexion and uses gravity pulling on your torso to achieve a greater shoulder flexion. Then after, or as another shoulder flexion exercise, is the wall reach with external rotation. I do this every now and then to test the effect of my other training. And I've gotten progressively more capable of doing this exercise, which is stand with your body completely flat against the wall. Get your hips in a neutral position, neutral tilt, and you have your arms in an external rotation, elbows and wrists completely against the wall, and you attempt to keep them against the wall as you raise them overhead. This can be used as an exercise for producing greater shoulder mobility, and also just as a way of testing whether your shoulder mobility is getting better. Ideally, you can keep your back flat against the wall, your head flat against the wall, your hips in neutral position, and still keep your shoulders, elbows, and wrists or hands against the wall. And then finally, for shoulder flexion, I do the bridge. This is advanced shoulder flexion exercise. I don't think everybody needs to do this, but if you want the ultimate shoulder flexion ability, training the bridge, starting with your feet on an elevated platform, as I show here, that's can produce the most shoulder flexion mobility, as well as working on mobility of the upper thoracic vertebrae. Okay, so then we have shoulder extension. So shoulder extension is raising your arms behind your back. So for this, I recommend active shoulder flexion first. So that is, active means that you're raising your arms behind your back under muscular control. You need a lightweight dowel. You can have no weight on the dowel, or as you progress, you can put a little bit of weight, like 1, 2, or 3 pounds on the bar. And you raise your arms behind you. Your goal is to get them to 90 degrees to your torso or parallel to the floor. So that's active shoulder flexion. You want to be able to make this excursion under muscular control, not just under loading. So next for shoulder flexion, I use the table rocks. So you can see how I do the table rocks in this video. The arms or hands and feet should be far enough so that when you descend into the squat position, the arms are drawn behind you so that you get a stretch in the shoulders. You're extending the range of motion in the shoulders. And you do this very gently as I'm demonstrating. You don't want to tear anything in the shoulder. You only go to the point where you feel a slight stretch and hold it for 5 to 10 seconds, and you can go back and forth 6 to 10 times. And then, in addition to the table rocks, so I'm listing these in the order that I would normally do them, from the easiest to the most advanced. So a little bit more advanced than that is this supine shoulder extension, where you're using gravity pulling down on your torso to provide a little bit more load to stretch your shoulder joint into extension. And when you reach, you start with your arms wide apart, and then you can try to walk them together as closely as you can, and then walk them apart, and so forth. And over time, you'll be able to lay back further under this load. So after that comes the passive supported shoulder extension. Now you don't, again, this is advanced. This is for people who want to develop the German hang, which is the most advanced expression of shoulder extension mobility. I emphasize that you don't have to do this unless you're trying to develop the German hang over time. You keep most of the weight on your feet You have your hands on this bar that's just a little bit higher than shoulder height, and you bear most of the weight on your feet, and then you allow gravity to stretch out your shoulders. Be very careful and only go to the point where you feel a slight stretch. Keep most of the weight on your feet, and gradually over time you'll get to the point where I have gotten where I can do the full German hang. I can do the full German hang actually with more than my body weight. And then your last shoulder mobility task is developing or working on circumduction. As you can see here, I just hold a light weight. I have a 2.5 pound barbell plate in my hand, and you work on circumduction, and you try to keep your arm close to your body. You can do this against a wall, standing with your shoulder against a wall, so that you have to move your shoulder in a small space between your shoulder and the wall. That's a kind of advanced circumduction exercise. And you go from the front to the back and then back to the front. That works the full circumduction range of motion. So I hope this video helps you develop more shoulder mobility, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Thanks for watching.